required. It says, discuss the factors that for the existence, completeness, and accuracy and valuation and allocation assertions for the cash and cash equivalents balance reflected in the statement of financial position of Grade Save at 31 December 2020. It's for 17 marks. Okay, what do we understand?
We're doing the risk at the assertion level.
Are you doing the risk or are you doing the factor that is causing the risk?
We're doing the factors.
Oh, factors. Like we discussed yesterday. Yes, and you are correct as well. It is around risk of materials, specifically at assertion level, because they've given us the assertions as well. And because it's a balance, we're talking about a balance. So it's a financial statement line item. So it's risk at an assertion level. We are noting the individual assertions that they've given us, right? So existence, completeness, and then accuracy, valuation, and allocation. What else do we understand from this? They're talking about a layout and a structure. So we need to structure our response, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about structure, because it was raised here that there's a concern about knowing how to structure the question. How would you guys approach this? What structure would you use?
I would use the assertions that they asked us to do as a heading, and then I write all the risk under them.
Something that looks like, let's put in a page break here. So it would be something that looks like this. You would existence, then what would you use? Numbering, or would you use bullet points? Why can't I put my stuff in?
I usually do bullet points. It helps me because when I put numbering, it makes me feel like I'm not writing enough.
Okay, that's a weird one, but okay, to each their own. So you would put your points down like this, and then you would say,
yes,
completeness.
Yes.
And then you would go blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
I don't know why it's putting it there. It's doing something very weird. I need it to be here. Let's put in another page break, sorry. You know, when technology doesn't want to be your friend anymore, it's just like, no, we're not doing this. Let's do this. Maybe this will work. Yeah, and then you would say completeness. And then here you would want to say accuracy, valuation, and allocation. And that's how you would structure your response.
Yes, that's how I do it.
Okay, this is also a fine way to do it. I don't have any issues with that. Is there anyone else who would do something different?
I'll use a table.
A table?
Yeah.
What would the table show?
Like I will put, like I'll write factors. I'll start with assertions and then write factors on the side.
Okay, so I don't like that approach. The reason I don't like that approach, so it would be a two table like this, right?
Yeah.
And then you would have assertions here.
Yes.
And you would have factors.
Yes.
Then you would start writing here, and then your assertion would be completeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you would write here as well, and then your assertion again would be completeness. How many times are you going to
No,
write
I'm not gonna write
completeness?
completeness. I'll just put completeness and then write whatever I'm thinking of, and then under completeness, and then complete. Go to the next assertion.
But then why a table? Because once you put a table, you're squashing your response. Now you only have half a page to write your factors. But if you write it like this, you have the full page.
I get I'll make 1/3 for assertions and then 2/3 for 2/3 for factors. I like table, I don't know why. Maybe I must stop, ne?
I think you must use a table when a table is necessary. Don't just use a table for the sake of using a table. Because it doesn't make sense to me. Once you put a table in, you only have half the page.
Okay. No,
And then your response is squashed, and then the marker can't read, and then the marker has already looked at 500 scripts. When they get to you, they're like, yo, this response is so squashed, I'm not even going to bother myself to try and understand what's being written here. Then you're going to write something, you're going to make a mistake, you're going to want to scratch it out, you're going to be writing in the middle there. Where's the space?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, so only use a table when it's necessary. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm not going to leave this one here because I don't like that one. Delete the table. Is there a different approach that somebody else would use?
I think that's the easiest.
It is the easiest. But another way you can do it is, yes, somebody wanted to say something.
Hi, Nancy. I was just asking what if we go and list the risk of material misstatements and just put the assertion in brackets. I think sometimes when I leave space to, I write the heading like you did with the first one, the example, and I find that some of those risks that I'm going to list now, they don't fit anymore, and I'm all over the place because then I edit the title as the assertion and then I list the stuff. So how about I just write everything that comes and then in brackets
So you want to do something. You want to do something that looks like this. Why doesn't this thing want to cooperate? You want to do something that looks like this, ... existence.
Exactly. ...
accuracy, valuation, allocation. You can also do that. You can. I think it's just as long as it's neatly presented. There's nothing wrong with that particular format. I think when you're going to do it this way, make sure that you've planned your question appropriately so that you're not forgetting. Because I think when you do it this way, it's easy to forget.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you
I
can
usually
agree, you
just
can
reserve a
disagree.
page for each assertion so that I don't worry about space.
Sorry, Apuoti.
I usually just reserve a page, even if I won't fill it up. For example, let's say completeness. I'll put completeness at the top, and then I know that that page is dedicated to completeness. Then the other page is dedicated to accuracy, valuation, and allocation, so that whatever mistakes I make, I still have space to continue, and I won't be squashing things in there.
That's also fine. I think what I would recommend is that if you do that, you should, at the bottom of the pages, just indicate how many pages you've used to answer this so that the marker knows that your response spreads over 5 pages and not 2 pages.
All right.
Sometimes if the marker can't find your stuff, then, I mean, we can ethics of markers until the sun comes down. But sometimes if they can't find your stuff, they just don't look for it. I mean, when they're under time pressure and they need to submit, they need to submit. So try to make your script as marker friendly as possible. I was going to say another way that you can do it. You see how this thing is broken down into a background, and then they start to talk about the cash management system. In the beginning, they start to talk about the point of sales. Then they start to talk about the accounting process. You can also the structure of the question, of the scenario to respond to the question. Does that make sense? So it can look something like this, where you have part A. And now you are bringing in your concerns around the background. So maybe you can say general factors. And then you bring things that are just general to the IT environment, like the size of the cash balance, you know, brings in, I don't know why this thing doesn't want to bring in bullet points. So then you can talk about the size of the balance. You can talk about the theft of the petty cash. And then you can then bring in, after discussing general factors, you'll then start to talk about what was the thing that was next, the cash management system. Then they spoke about the point of sale system. So then you can talk about the point of sale system. Then you bring in all of the concerns that you had previously around the point of sale system. Then you know you've spoken about all the factors that you worried about when it comes to the point of sale. Then after that, they spoke about the accounting process. Then you bring in the accounting process. Then you talk about all the issues that you had, the fact that the journals are not reviewed, blah, 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 blah. So that's also another way that you can bring it in. And then you know that you've addressed actually every section of the system description that they've provided you, and you've actually addressed all the parts. The risk that you run sometimes with the assertion approach like that, you might miss specific things that fall under here. So I think as a backup, if you do this approach, double check it against that approach. But with this one, you could potentially even do it this way. And then have your blah, 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 and say that the issue there is existence, blah, 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 the issue there is this. Does that make sense? Those are just potential ways that you can format it. Does that fix the question that we had in the beginning about struggling with format?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect. Then, like I said, I'm not going to go through the solution, so we're not going to talk about what the correct answers are. You guys have that, but as long as you have a format, you know kind of what to expect. And then part B is to describe the additional controls that should be implemented at grade safe to prevent or detect the risk of material misstatement in the existence and completeness of the cash and cash equivalence balance. So seeing that they want additional controls, meaning that they don't want you to mention something that is already there. So if you saw a control in the system, you can't mention it. They want you to mention a control that is over and above what you're seeing there, right? And they only want the controls for prevention and detection. They don't want the controls for correction. Remember, we said that a control can prevent, detect, or correct. So don't bring in controls that will correct the misstatement. Only bring in controls that will either prevent it or detect it. And then again, they were specific to these two assertions, existence and completeness. So in terms of structure, again, you can, play around with these formats, think about those kind of things. That's why it's also very important when they say you should plan your question before, or plan your response before you actually respond. Take the time to take a step back and say, these are the things that I need to discuss. This is the format that is available to me. Options that I can use in best which to present my response, such that I'm mentioning everything that is there. I'm also touching on all the different aspects, because you don't want your response to be one-sided, where you're only picking up things on existence and you're not picking up things on completeness. There has to be a balance, otherwise you won't pass the question. So that step back to plan your question, plan your response is really important. In terms of this, I would use the same format that I used here, because these two are related when they talk about the existence and the completeness. And it's also around the cash and cash equivalence balance. Remember, we said that you have a factor that causes a risk, and then you bring in a control to either prevent or detect or correct the risk of material misstatement. So because now you're bringing in the control aspect, you can still use the same format and say, for existence, these are the controls. For completeness, these are the controls. And then accuracy and stuff won't be there because they didn't ask for it in part B. Also here for part A, you can write your controls, put your assertions and things in the brackets. Or you can go here and say in the general factors, I think as general controls, they can bring these things in and indicate the assertion on the side. Say in the point of sale system, I think they should bring these things in. In the accounting process, I think they should bring these controls in. Somebody's got a hand up. Khumotso.
Yes, Onati, I just wanted to just take us back, I'm sorry, to that first question. Once we have identified that we need to look at the finance and investment cycle, I just want to check. So the finance and investment is split into two, but
It's
there's
not the
no-
finance and investment cycle.
Mm.
I was
That's
when we did the
where
cycles yesterday, we spoke about how. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying that's where I got lost because I was thinking, okay, it's finance and investment, and I tried to look for that cash and cash equivalent under these two categories, and I realized there's no cash and cash equivalent. Then I was like, I'm completely lost with this question.
Yeah, so it's not that per se, because remember when we did revenue, we spoke about how there's the revenue line item, we spoke about the trade receivables line item, and then we spoke about the cash and cash equivalents line item, because that's where you put your receipts in your bank. Then we spoke about the payables, and even though it wasn't specifically written on the slides, I did mention that your bank account is where you would do your payments. So the cash and cash equivalents touches all the cycles, because even your payroll comes out of your cash and cash equivalents.
Yes.
Anything that you are purchasing is coming out of your cash and cash equivalents.
Yes. Okay. All right, now I get it now. Thanks.
It's not a cycle on its own. It forms part of all the cycles.
All the cycles. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
When you're buying inventory, you're using your bank account. When you are receiving revenue, you use your bank account. When you're paying employees, you use your bank account. When you purchase shares, you use your bank account. All the cycles touch bank and cash.
Yes. Okay, no, perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
I understand
Cool.
it now.
So
Yeah.
I've answered that one. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yes. So I was saying I would generally, for part B, I would use the same format. And part B, because now you need to bring in controls. We're not just on ISA 315, we are on ISA 315, and you need to go through your auditing notes. So auditing notes is going to help you identify the controls around that. Cool. Everybody happy with part B?
Would I be wrong, ne? Reading part A and part B, seeing that these two questions, they do relate. Maybe I say as my heading, part A, part B, and then I write for existent, and then I say factors, and then I say controls, and then I go.
Don't do that. Don't. It's not wrong, but it's confusing to the marker.
Okay.
Yeah, don't
like
do
that would
it's
just
confusing.
like it will save me time of going back to say, okay, this is a fact I identify, this is a control for it. Because
No, but you're not giving controls for you're not necessarily giving controls for the factors. Because even the factors that you are raising here, they could already be controls in place for them. You are providing additional controls. So if what you were doing was to provide a control against every factor, you would then use a table format, like one of our colleagues wanted to use here. Then a table format is appropriate. On the one side of the table, you would bring the factor in. On the other side of the table, you would bring the control in.
All right. Makes sense.
Here, you're not doing that. Be very careful. You're not doing that, because it doesn't say here, provide controls that will address the risk factors identified in part A. It doesn't say that. Don't create your
Or
own
should the
requirement.
question say that, then I can do that.
Yes.
But if it doesn't, then I must just stick to this perfect format.
I don't know that it's perfect, but I think it's relatable.
Yeah, but it makes good sense to use that format. Like it's structured.
Yes.
Okay, let me just say this structured format.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Then you would do that. Be very, very careful. Don't create your own required. Read what is there and do what they have written there. Don't add your own things. Cool. Everybody happy with part B?
Hi,
Yes.
Unati.
Hi.
Um, can you please advise or on exam techniques, especially when it comes to assertions? Because yeah, I really struggle with if a question is structured like this, to answer it, I really sort of like struggle. So what would be your advice to get to understand on how to approach again these questions, this type of questions?
So you need to understand the assertions. If you don't understand what the assertions are and what they mean, it will be very difficult for you to make that link from the assertions back to the control objectives. Remember yesterday we discussed control objectives. A control has an objective to make sure that that your process is valid, accurate, or complete. Right? Then when you break down your control objectives into assertions, you've already got accuracy. Accuracy is plain, straightforward, and completeness is also plain and straightforward. That validity part talks about occurrence, because if a transaction is not valid, it has not occurred. And you'll see that a lot when it comes to your Companies Act. Once we start to do substantive procedures that touch on Companies Act, and then maybe we start to evaluate misstatements and things like that, and we bring the assertions in, you will start to see that if there was maybe a loan to a director, and then it should have been a loan to the director, that transaction is actually not valid. Because the transaction is not valid, it means it could not have occurred. So your occurrence then becomes at risk. You need to understand the links between your assertions and your control objectives. Once you understand the link between your assertions and your control objectives, you can then start to say, what can go wrong? Okay, this thing will potentially not be accurate. So you start by saying, if the cashier is manually the amount of change, what can go wrong here? What can go wrong is the fact that she can miscalculate the amount. If she's miscalculated the amount, it means the amount is not accurate. What assertion are you dealing with? Accuracy. Does that make it a bit clearer?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So in this case, do I go back to auditing notes to get to understand all these principles, or even the handbook is going to be sufficient?
I think when it comes to assertions, the ISAs are a good place to start. And then if you're not getting it from the ISA, you can then go in and see the breakdown in auditing notes.
Oh, thank you so much.
And then I suppose if you're still not grasping the breakdown, that's where you would need to arrange a consultation.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Cool. Everybody happy with part B? Okay. Yes. Part C says, discuss with specific reference to the information provided, the matters that NNG should consider before accepting the engagement to audit the 2020 financial year financial statements of GradeSafe. Then it tells us we have like a limitation, exclude any recommendations for safeguards. So don't put in safeguards. But this is also a clue that the CPC needs to be discussed, because the CPC is the only place that actually has safeguards. Okay, what are we picking up here? We're picking up that we need to talk about the considerations. So this is aspect that should be considered before accepting. So correct, Octavia, it is pre-engagement. What do we know about pre-engagement?
It's like terms and conditions, like your things that you need to consider before you accept the client.
Yeah,
like
but from an exam
resources.
technique perspective, what do we know about pre-engagement?
4 headings.
Yes, we've got a nice little structure. What is the
Yeah.
structure for pre-engagement activities? What do we want to look at first?
Investigate
Investigate the client.
the client, and then we check our competency, resources, and all that.
Oh, I can't type as fast as what you speak. Investigate the client.
Determine the skills, competence, and resources that we have. And then we evaluate compliance with relevant regulations and ethical requirements
Other
by the
controls.
client.
And then
Is it other significant matters?
what were those formalities? What were those formalities that they were saying? We can forget the formalities for now.
Other matters
Establish the
include the engagement
template.
letter.
Terms of engagement. So that's the structure you would use. For part C. Happiness. And then you know that when you get here, this is where you're bringing in your CPC, right? So this is where you're bringing in your CPC, and this is where you're bringing in your Companies Act and potentially your Auditing Professions Act if you have an indication that you might have an RI, a reportable irregularity at that stage, right? Then this from
But specifically
ISO
on this
200.
question, nothing they said it's not required. CPC.
Sorry?
On
It is
this
required. We
specific
discussed familiarity. Yeah, we discussed familiarity threats and all those things. What were we discussing before, Kanti?
No, I'm saying on the specific question, it says exclude the safeguards.
Yeah, so you'll still discuss the threat, you'll discuss the principle, you'll discuss
Okay.
whether or not it's at an
Only the
acceptable level, but you won't give a safeguard.
Okay.
CPC has its own structure. The structure of a CPC question is that you need to bring in your threat plus the principle. After you've done that, you need to, in fact, you must start with the issue. So start with the issue that is giving you the threat and the principle, right? Once you've got the threat and the principle and your issue down, you discuss whether or not it's at an acceptable level. And then all you do is bring in a safeguard. But now what they are saying is, we don't want the safeguard. So they only want these ones.
Yeah.
Without the safeguard. Okay.
Yes.
And remember, each one is like 1 mark, 1 mark, 1 mark. It's out the window, like after office hours, the brain doesn't want to spell. Okay. Is everybody happy with part C? And then again, please guys pay particular attention. They want you to consider. They're not asking you for concerns. They want your considerations at this point. So you're going to write the positive and the negative. So in terms of a consideration, it is a positive, the fact that they already know this company. So when you start to discuss your skills, competence, and resources, and you are bringing in whether or not they have the expertise and the knowledge to audit this client, it is a consideration that they've been doing their tax services and their payroll services and all of those things, so they know the client. So from an expertise and client knowledge perspective, they tick the box. But it is also a concern that they do all of those things because they are providing non-assurance services. And so you're concerned about independence in terms of the CPC. So you would bring that point under the CPC stuff that you would discuss. Cool. Okay, then the last thing from me is just you guys are going to receive a solution. I think just very important to remember, guys, these things are suggested solutions. So if you have stuff that isn't on the solution, it isn't always necessarily incorrect. I think it would just be a matter of trying to understand why perhaps it's not there based on the mark allocation. Because remember, sometimes, I mean, as much as it's only for 16 marks, you could write 50 things, and I mean, not all 50 things are going to be on the solution. Only the ones that the person who sets the question thinks are important. That's why sometimes on a solution you'll see they'll say there any other valid point. It's because they know that there's so many things that you can think of and not everything will be there. So don't be discouraged if your stuff is not on there. But if you're attempting a lot of questions and you're seeing that a lot of the things that you are writing are actually not in the suggested solution, then you potentially have a problem. If it's 1 or 2 questions, it's not so bad. But if there's a lot of it, then again, I think I would advise that you would consult so that you can have an understanding of why you are not able to pinpoint what needs to or what was decided as what is actually the solution for this problem. Cool. Does everybody feel, I don't know, I suppose, confident that they would be able to attempt this question and pass it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. If there's no other questions, that is it from me. Wish you guys all the best with your preparation for test 2, and I will see you guys when we do phase 3. All the best. Have a good evening. And yeah.
Unati,
Study. Yes.
I have one question, please. Like, what's your tip when it comes to the, what can I say? When it comes to the speed of writing the test? Because I'm really struggling to finish.
You need to write, for every mark. So you see how this is 16 marks, you'll take 16 marks times 1.5. And that's the amount of time you need to spend in minutes. So if it's a 10-mark question and you multiply it by 1.5, you have 15 minutes to respond to a 10-mark question.
Oh, okay. All right.
So in order to improve your time, so okay, time management, right, is something that people like to say, I ran out of time. Did you run out of time, or were you writing a lot of things that you didn't know, and then because you were writing a lot of things that you didn't know, trying to force yourself to know things that you don't, ended up running out of time? There's a difference. When I practice questions, my suggestion is always do it in exam conditions. Set your timer. Start with one color pen. Start with a black pen. Write your 10-mark question in 15 minutes with a black pen. When the 15 minutes expires, put your black pen down, pick up a blue pen, and continue writing. You finish writing until you feel like, okay, I don't have anything else that I can write under this point. Then you take your suggested solution, you take a red pen, and you start to mark yourself. And you mark yourself strictly. After you've marked yourself strictly, you look at how many ticks you were getting and where you were getting those ticks. Get ticks in the area where you wrote in black, which is where you started, and you are also getting ticks in the area where you wrote in blue, which is where you continued after you ran out of time. It means that you know your work, but you indeed did run out of time. At that point, I would suggest that you look at the length of your sentences compared to the length of the sentences in the suggested solution, and see how you can drop a few words to make your point a lot clearer very quickly. If you have marks in the black area and then you don't have marks in the blue area, it means that even if you had all the time in the world, you were never going to get that thing right. That means you have a knowledge problem. Because even after your time expired and you continued writing, you still got those things wrong.
Okay, that's a nice tip.
Okay. That's how I evaluate whether or not I have a time management problem or I have a knowledge problem. A lot of the time people have a knowledge problem, but then they want to hide behind time management. It's not that. A lot of the time, time management problem is actually a knowledge problem.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, then that's it from my side. Have a good evening, guys.
Thank
Keep
you.
well.
Thank you so much. Nancy.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, bye.